Hey guys, tonight we begin with Abraham and Lot, Genesis 13:14. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey. The sun hangs low over the ancient land of Canaan, casting long shadows across rolling hills dotted with olive trees. Abraham and his nephew Lot have returned from their journey to Egypt, their flocks and herds grown large and prosperous. The gentle bleating of sheep mingles with the soft lowing of cattle as shepherds guide their charges toward evening pasture. Abraham's tent sits on a small rise, its dark goat hair fabric rippling softly in the warm breeze. Nearby, Lot's own dwelling mirrors his uncle's, both patriarchs having prospered greatly under God's blessing. The smell of wood smoke drifts from cooking fires as servants prepare the evening meal, their quiet movements creating a peaceful rhythm in the fading light. Yet beneath this tranquil scene, a tension grows. The land that once seemed vast enough for both households now feels crowded. Where pastures once provided abundant grazing, the increased herds compete for grass and water. The shepherds of Abraham and Lot eye each other warily as they lead their flocks to the same familiar wells and meadows. Abraham sits quietly outside his tent, his weathered hands folded in contemplation. The promise of God echoes in his heart, yet he sees the strain building between his people and those of his beloved nephew. The evening breeze carries the distant sound of raised voices. Another disagreement over grazing rights dissolved into the approaching darkness. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hills of Canaan as Abraham and Lot gazed upon the land that stretched endlessly before them. This was the promised land, flowing with milk and honey, where olive trees dotted the hillsides and streams meandered through valleys carpeted with wildflowers. Abraham's flocks had grown numerous during their time in this place. His servants tended to countless sheep whose wool gleamed white in the golden light. Cattle grazed peacefully in the meadows, their bells creating a gentle symphony that carried on the warm breeze. The tents of Abraham's household spread across the landscape like a small city, each family finding their place within this growing community. Lot, too, had prospered greatly. His own flocks had multiplied, and his herds had increased beyond what he had ever imagined when they first set out from Ur. The wealth of both men was evident in the abundance that surrounded them. Silver vessels caught the morning light, and fine fabrics adorned their dwellings. Yet this very prosperity was beginning to create gentle tensions. The land, rich as it was, seemed to grow smaller each day as both households expanded. The herdsmen moved their animals across familiar paths, seeking the greenest pastures and the clearest water sources. Sometimes, Abraham's shepherds would arrive at a well, only to find Lot's men already there, and quiet discussions would follow about who might water their flocks first. The Canaanites and Perizzites also dwelt in this land, their own settlements scattered throughout the region. They watched these growing households with interest, noting how the flocks moved like living clouds across their ancestral grounds. The coexistence remained peaceful, but space was becoming precious. In the evening hours, when the air grew cool and the stars began to appear, Abraham would walk among his tents and observe his nephew's equally impressive settlement nearby. Both men had been blessed beyond measure, yet Abraham sensed that decisions lay ahead that would shape their future in this promised land. The dust had settled from their journey, and now Abraham found himself standing beneath the wide canopy of ancient oaks near Hebron. The afternoon light filtered through the leaves in gentle patterns, casting soft shadows across the ground where he had chosen to make his camp. Here, in this peaceful grove, the presence of the Lord seemed to hover like a warm breeze. Abraham's flocks grazed contentedly in the distance, their soft bleating, a gentle rhythm that spoke of abundance and peace. His servants moved quietly about their tasks, setting up the familiar black goat hair tents that had become their homes beneath the endless sky. The scent of cooking fires began to drift on the evening air, mingling with the sweet fragrance of wild herbs that grew abundantly in this blessed land. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Abraham felt a familiar stirring in his spirit. The voice of the Almighty came to him then, not with thunder or earthquake, but with the gentle certainty of a promise long awaited. "Lift up your eyes," the voice whispered, "and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward." Abraham raised his weathered face and gazed across the rolling hills that stretched endlessly in every direction. The land lay before him like a vast tapestry, woven with streams that caught the last light of day, fields that swayed gently in the evening breeze, and valleys that seemed to hold the very breath of eternity. "All the land that you see," the voice continued, "I will give to you and to your offspring forever." The weight of this promise settled over Abraham like a warm cloak. Though his hair had grown grey and his steps had slowed, though Sarah remained childless and the years continued their steady march, still the Lord spoke of offspring as numerous as the dust of the earth. The very ground beneath his feet seemed to pulse with the certainty of God's faithfulness, and Abraham felt his heart swell with quiet wonder at the mysterious ways of the Almighty. The quiet of the evening settles over the land as we follow Abraham into a time of decision. The prosperity that had blessed both him and his nephew Lot has created an unexpected challenge. Their flocks have grown so numerous, their herds so vast, that the land can barely sustain them both in the same region. Abraham sits beneath the spreading branches of a terebinth tree, watching the sun paint the hills in shades of amber and gold. His shepherds have come to him with reports of disputes over water rights and grazing areas. Lot's herdsmen, too, have voiced their concerns. The once peaceful coexistence has become strained, and Abraham's heart is heavy with the weight of what must come. The gentle wind carries the distant sound of lowing cattle and bleating sheep. Somewhere in the gathering dusk, cooking fires begin to twinkle like earthbound stars. Abraham knows that tomorrow will bring a conversation that will change everything. He rises slowly, his weathered hands smoothing his robes. The decision he must make requires wisdom beyond his years, patience beyond his nature. Yet in his heart, he feels the quiet stirring of divine guidance, that familiar whisper that has led him through so many valleys and over so many hills. The night air grows cooler now, carrying the scent of wild herbs and the distant promise of rain. Abraham walks toward his tent, where Sarah waits with the evening meal. But first, he pauses to look out over the land that has sheltered them both, knowing that by tomorrow's end, one of them will call it home, while the other must journey on. In this moment of calm before change, Abraham finds peace in trusting the path that lies ahead, whatever it may bring. The morning sun filters through the tent walls as Abraham and Lot sit together, their conversation flowing like the gentle streams that wind through the valley below. Both men have been blessed with abundance. Their flocks have multiplied, their herds have grown strong, and their households have prospered under the watchful care of the Almighty. Yet with this blessing comes a challenge that weighs quietly on Abraham's heart. The land that once seemed vast enough for their modest beginnings now feels crowded. Their shepherds move among the grazing animals, calling softly to guide the sheep and cattle, but the pastures are growing thin. The wells that once provided ample water now require careful sharing between the two households. Abraham's weathered hands rest peacefully on his knees as he observes the bustling activity around them. Servants move with quiet efficiency, tending to their daily tasks, while the gentle lowing of cattle and the soft bleating of sheep create a familiar symphony. The morning air carries the scent of grass and earth, mixed with the faint smoke from cooking fires. Lot, his nephew, sits nearby, his younger eyes scanning the horizon with a different kind of longing. Where Abraham sees the challenges of abundance, Lot sees possibilities stretching beyond the hills. The fertile Jordan Valley beckons in the distance, its green expanse visible even from their elevated position. Abraham's voice carries the wisdom of years spent following God's call, while Lot's responses reveal the eager ambition of youth. Soon, Abraham knows, a choice must be made. The land can no longer support both their growing households in harmony. The time has come for them to part ways, to seek separate paths in this vast land that God has promised to bless. The fertile plains of Jordan stretched endlessly before them, a green carpet woven with streams and dotted with grazing pastures. Here, where the river meandered through rich soil, the land seemed to whisper promises of abundance. Lot's eyes swept across this verdant expanse, taking in the sight of well-watered meadows that reminded him of Egypt's bounty, of the very garden of the Lord. The morning mist clung gently to the grasslands, and the sound of flowing water carried on the soft breeze. Flocks of birds moved lazily overhead, their calls mingling with the distant lowing of cattle already grazing in these blessed fields. This was land that could support great herds, land where a man might prosper and grow wealthy. Abraham stood quietly beside his nephew, his weathered hands resting on his walking staff. The old patriarch's gaze was thoughtful as he observed the obvious appeal of this territory. The Jordan Valley was indeed beautiful, its soil dark and fertile, its waters clear and abundant. Yet something in Abraham's expression suggested he was seeing beyond the surface beauty, perhaps recognizing what lay hidden in the distant cities of the plain. The choice lay before them now, uncle and nephew standing at this crossroads of destiny. The sun climbed higher, warming the earth beneath their feet, and somewhere in the distance the gentle tinkling of sheep bells drifted on the morning air. Time moved slowly here, as if the very land invited careful contemplation of the decision that would shape their separate futures. Lot's servants had already begun pointing toward the richest pastures, their voices carrying excitement at the prospect of such abundant grazing. The promise of prosperity seemed to shimmer in the heat rising from the sun-warmed earth, and the younger man found himself drawn inexorably toward this land of plenty. Abraham stands quietly in the morning light, watching the gentle movement of his vast herds across the rolling hills. The soft lowing of cattle mingles with the distant bleating of sheep, creating a peaceful symphony that has become the soundtrack of his wandering life. His weathered hands rest comfortably on his walking staff as he contemplates the abundance that surrounds him. The flocks have multiplied beyond counting since his journey began. Each morning brings the sight of new lambs taking their first tentative steps, their mothers calling softly to guide them toward fresh pasture. The herds move with unhurried grace, following paths worn smooth by countless hooves, paths that lead to water sources known only to the shepherds who have walked these lands for generations. Abraham's servants move among the animals with practiced ease, their voices calm and reassuring as they guide the flocks toward the sweetest grass. The tinkling of bells attached to the lead animals creates a gentle rhythm that seems to match the steady breathing of the earth itself. Dust motes dance in the golden morning light, settling softly on wool and hide. The patriarch's eyes hold a quiet satisfaction as he surveys this scene of plenty. His flocks stretch across the landscape like a living carpet, their collective presence a testament to the promises whispered to him under starlit skies. Yet even in this moment of abundance, there is a thoughtfulness in his expression, a recognition that such blessings bring their own gentle responsibilities. The grass beneath his feet is soft and yielding, still touched with the morning dew that will soon evaporate in the warming sun. A light breeze carries the familiar scents of livestock and earth, of wildflowers blooming in distant meadows, of the timeless rhythm of pastoral life that has sustained his people since time beyond memory. In this quiet morning scene, Abraham embodies the careful stewardship that has allowed his household to flourish, his presence among the flocks both protective and nurturing, like a shepherd watching over a peaceful dream. The gentle slopes near Hebron welcomed Abraham with their ancient wisdom, where massive oak trees had stood for generations beyond counting. Here, at Mamre, beneath these spreading branches, he would make his dwelling place. The thick trunks rose like pillars, their broad canopies filtering the desert sun into patterns of dancing light and shadow. Abraham moved with quiet purpose among his household, directing the placement of tents in the shade of the great oaks. The fabric rustled softly in the breeze, each tent finding its place in the natural shelter. His servants worked with practiced efficiency, their movements measured and calm, understanding the rhythm of nomadic life. The ground beneath the oaks was level and welcoming, worn smooth by countless seasons. Springs bubbled nearby, their waters clear and cold, essential for the flocks and herds that would graze the surrounding hills. The location offered everything a wandering family needed: water, shade, pasture, and the peaceful presence of these ancient trees. Sarah emerged from the main tent, her eyes surveying their new home with satisfaction. The oaks provided a sense of permanence, even in their temporary dwelling, their massive presence offering comfort and stability. Children played safely in the filtered sunlight, their laughter mixing with the gentle sound of wind through leaves. The flocks settled contentedly in the nearby meadows, their bells creating a soft melody that blended with the whisper of grass in the breeze. Shepherds kept watch from comfortable spots beneath smaller trees, their voices carrying peacefully across the distance as they called to the animals. As twilight approached, smoke began to rise from cooking fires, the scent of evening meals drifting through the camp. The great oaks stood sentinel over this scene of domestic tranquility, their branches reaching toward the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. In the quietness that follows great events, Abraham sits beneath the ancient oak near his tent, watching the gentle movement of shadows as the sun begins its descent toward the western hills. The air carries the familiar sounds of his household settling into evening routines, the soft lowing of cattle, the distant murmur of servants preparing the evening meal, the rustle of tent flaps in the mild breeze. His mind wanders back over the recent months, each memory unfolding like pages in a treasured scroll. The difficult conversation with Lot seems so long ago now, yet the wisdom of their peaceful separation grows clearer with each passing day. Sometimes the kindest choice requires the greatest trust that God's provision extends beyond what our eyes can see. The rescued captives from Sodom have long since returned to their homes, carrying with them stories of deliverance that will be told around fires for generations. Abraham touches the simple wooden staff beside him, remembering how it felt in his hands during that long night march, how the stars seemed to guide their steps through unfamiliar territory. From somewhere in the camp comes the sound of gentle laughter, Sarah's voice mixing with those of the women as they work together in the cooling air. These ordinary moments, Abraham realizes, are perhaps the greatest treasures of all. Not the dramatic rescues or the meetings with kings, but the simple rhythm of daily life lived in faith. A young lamb wanders close to where he sits, and Abraham extends his hand, letting the creature nuzzle his palm. Even the smallest acts of trust, he thinks, mirror the larger story of walking with God. The lamb knows the shepherd's voice, just as Abraham has learned to recognize the quiet guidance that comes in whispers rather than storms. As darkness approaches, Abraham rises slowly, his joints reminding him of the battles fought and the long journeys taken. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities to trust, new chances to extend blessing to others. But tonight, in this moment of perfect peace, he is simply grateful for the gift of reflection and the quiet wisdom that comes when we pause to remember God's faithfulness. The morning light filters softly through the tent walls as Abraham rises early, his mind already turning toward the decision that awaits. The sounds of the camp stirring gently around him carry the familiar rhythm of daily life. The soft lowing of cattle, the quiet murmur of servants preparing for another day, the gentle bleating of sheep in the distance. He steps outside and breathes deeply of the cool morning air. The landscape stretches endlessly in all directions, rolling hills dotted with olive trees and patches of green pasture. This is the land of promise, the place where God has led him, yet now it seems too small to contain both his household and that of his nephew Lot. Abraham walks slowly through the camp, observing the subtle tensions that have grown between the herdsmen. Here, a group of his servants waters their flocks at a well, while nearby, Lot's men wait with barely concealed impatience for their turn. There, two herdsmen eye each other warily as their animals graze closer together than comfort allows. The weight of leadership settles gently on Abraham's shoulders. He has seen kingdoms rise and fall, witnessed the struggles that come when resources grow scarce and tempers begin to fray. Yet he also carries within him the deep peace of one who has heard the voice of the Almighty, who knows that provision comes not from grasping, but from trust. As he continues his quiet morning walk, Abraham's thoughts turn to the conversation he must have with Lot. The words form slowly in his mind, each one chosen with care. There will be no harsh demands, no assertion of rights that age and authority might give him. Instead, there will be the gentle wisdom of one who has learned to hold earthly things lightly. The sun climbs higher, casting longer shadows across the peaceful encampment, as Abraham prepares to offer his nephew the gift of choice. The morning sun rises gently over the landscape, as Abraham and Lot survey their growing herds and flocks. The land around them stretches peacefully in all directions, dotted with tents and grazing animals. Both men have been blessed with abundance, their livestock multiplying steadily since their return from Egypt. Abraham walks slowly among his cattle, his weathered hands resting thoughtfully on his staff. The animals move quietly in the soft morning light, their bells creating a gentle rhythm that carries across the hills. Nearby, Lot tends to his own substantial herds, the sounds of bleating sheep and lowing cattle filling the air with pastoral tranquility. The shepherds and herdsmen work diligently, leading their charges to fresh pastures and clear streams. You can almost hear the soft whisper of grass bending beneath countless hooves, the quiet conversations between the men as they guide their animals through the familiar routines of nomadic life. As the day progresses, it becomes clear that the land, though generous, struggles to support both households. The pastures that once seemed endless now feel crowded. Water sources that were once abundant must be shared more carefully. The peaceful coexistence that has defined their journey together faces a gentle but persistent challenge. Abraham notices the subtle signs first. The way the grass grows thinner in places, how the flocks must travel farther each day to find adequate grazing. His heart feels heavy with the growing realization that change must come, though he approaches this knowledge with the patient wisdom that has guided him through so many seasons of uncertainty. The evening brings quiet reflection as both men contemplate their circumstances under the star-filled sky. The morning sun cast long shadows across the camp as Abraham rose early, his heart heavy with the weight of decision. The previous evening's conversation with Lot had settled into a quiet resolve. There would be no harsh words, no bitter arguments. Only the gentle wisdom of a man who had learned to trust in God's provision. As the camp stirred to life, Abraham walked slowly among the tents, observing the careful choreography his people had developed to avoid conflict. His herdsmen moved their flocks to the eastern pastures while Lot's men guided theirs westward. Even the servants drew water from the wells at different times, their movements synchronized by necessity rather than harmony. The patriarch paused beside a weathered olive tree, its gnarled branches reaching skyward like aged hands in prayer. How many generations had this tree witnessed? How many families had found shelter beneath its canopy? Abraham placed his palm against the rough bark, feeling the slow pulse of life within. Like this ancient tree, he too was learning to weather storms with patience and grace. In the distance, he could see Lot emerging from his tent, his nephew's face bearing the same contemplative expression. The younger man's servants bustled about, preparing for what both men knew would be a day of choosing. The flocks seemed to sense the change as well. The goats bleated softly, the sheep huddled closer to their shepherds. Abraham breathed deeply, tasting the morning air tinged with dust and the faint sweetness of acacia blossoms. Soon, very soon, these familiar rhythms would change forever. The camps would divide, the families would separate, and the land would witness the beginning of two distinct journeys. But for now, in these quiet moments before the sun climbed higher, there was still time for reflection, for gratitude, and for the gentle hope that God's hand would guide them both toward the futures he had prepared. The morning sun climbs over the familiar hills of Bethel, casting long shadows across the ancient ground where Abraham once pitched his tent. Here, Between Bethel and Ai, where he had first built an altar to the Lord, the patriarch returns with his household after their sojourn in Egypt. The acacia trees rustle softly in the morning breeze, their leaves whispering stories of the years that have passed. Abraham's servants move quietly through the camp, tending to the animals and preparing for another day in this sacred place. The smell of wood smoke drifts from cooking fires, mixing with the sweet scent of wild herbs that grow among the limestone rocks. Abraham walks slowly to the place where his altar once stood. The stones remain, weathered by rain and sun, but still marking the spot where he first called upon the name of the Lord in this land. His footsteps are measured, thoughtful, as he approaches this place of prayer and remembrance. The hills roll gently away in all directions, covered with sparse grass and scattered olive trees. In the distance, shepherds guide their flocks across the slopes, their voices carrying softly on the wind as they call to their sheep. The landscape breathes with quiet life, unhurried and peaceful. Lot stands nearby, surveying the land with different eyes than his uncle. Where Abraham sees a place of worship and divine promise, Lot sees the practical concerns of grazing land and water sources. The two men, uncle and nephew, share this moment of return, yet their hearts are drawn to different things. The sun continues its slow climb, warming the earth and bringing the day fully to life. Birds call from the terebinth trees, and somewhere in the distance, a dove coos softly. This is the land of promise, where God's covenant with Abraham will unfold through generations yet to come. The camp settles into its evening rhythm as the last embers of cooking fires fade to glowing coals. Abraham walks slowly among his people, his sandaled feet making soft sounds against the packed earth. The familiar weight of responsibility rests gently on his shoulders, but tonight it feels lighter somehow, softened by the peace that has come with their decision to separate. A young shepherd approaches, bowing respectfully. His voice is barely above a whisper as he reports that the flocks are secure for the night, the animals content in their temporary enclosures. Abraham nods his approval, placing a gentle hand on the man's shoulder before the shepherd melts back into the gathering darkness. The night air carries the mingled scents of cooling earth and distant cedar. Abraham pauses beside a small cluster of tents where families are settling their children for sleep. Soft lullabies drift from within, mothers' voices creating a tapestry of comfort that spreads across the encampment like a gentle blessing. Sarah emerges from their tent, her movements graceful in the starlight. She carries a small oil lamp, its flame dancing quietly in the still air. Without words, she joins Abraham in his evening walk, their footsteps falling into the easy rhythm of countless such walks before. They pass the area where the elders gather, their voices low and thoughtful as they discuss the day's events and tomorrow's plans. Near the edge of camp, the night watchmen take their posts, their presence a quiet assurance of safety. They exchange soft greetings with Abraham and Sarah, their respect evident in their careful attention to duty. Abraham gazes toward the horizon where Lot's caravan disappeared earlier, offering a silent prayer for his nephew's journey. The vast sky seems to hold them all in its gentle embrace, a reminder of promises that stretch beyond the visible world. The first pale light of dawn begins to touch the eastern horizon, painting the sky in the softest shades of rose and gold. Abraham stirs gently in his tent, awakening to the quiet sounds of morning in the ancient world. The air is cool and fresh, carrying the sweet scent of dew-moistened grass and the distant fragrance of wild herbs growing along the hillsides. Outside, the camp slowly comes to life with the peaceful rhythms that have guided nomadic peoples for countless generations. The shepherds rise quietly, their movements unhurried and purposeful. They check on the flocks, counting the sheep and goats with practiced eyes, ensuring that all are well after the night's rest. The animals graze contentedly in the morning light, their gentle bleating creating a soothing symphony that drifts across the landscape. Sarah emerges from her tent, her steps graceful and calm as she begins the morning tasks. She draws water from the well, the sound of the rope and bucket creating a gentle rhythm that speaks of home and comfort. The servants move about their duties with quiet efficiency, preparing the morning meal and tending to the needs of the household. The sun climbs higher, warming the earth and chasing away the last shadows of night. Abraham walks among his people, his presence bringing a sense of peace and security. His words are gentle and encouraging, spoken with the wisdom of one who has learned to trust in divine guidance through all of life's journeys. Birds begin their morning songs, their melodies weaving through the air like threads of pure music. The landscape stretches endlessly in all directions, rolling hills covered in green grass and dotted with ancient oak trees. In the distance, the mountains stand silent and majestic, their peaks touched by the golden light of the rising sun. The morning breeze carries the sounds of a world awakening to new possibilities, while the peaceful rhythm of camp life continues its timeless dance beneath the vast and sheltering sky. Abraham stands alone on the ridge where he had said farewell to Lot, the dust from his nephew's caravan still settling in the distant air. The silence feels different now, not empty, but expectant, as if the very stones beneath his feet are holding their breath. He gazes toward the fertile plains of the Jordan, where Lot's tents are becoming mere specks on the horizon, then turns his weathered face toward the hill country that stretches endlessly before him. The Lord's voice comes to him then, gentle as the evening breeze that stirs the grass around his sandaled feet. "Lift up your eyes from where you are," the voice says, "and look north and south, east and west." Abraham raises his gaze, taking in the rolling hills clothed in olive groves, the valleys where streams wind like silver ribbons through green meadows, the distant mountains that rise like ancient guardians against the sky. "All the land that you see," the Lord continues, "I will give to you and your offspring forever." The words settle into Abraham's heart like seeds finding good soil. He closes his eyes and lets the promise wash over him, feeling the weight and wonder of it. When he opens them again, the landscape seems transformed, not just by what it is, but by what it represents. "I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if anyone could count the dust, then your offspring could be counted." Abraham kneels and takes a handful of the rich earth, letting it sift slowly through his fingers. Each grain catches the golden light of the setting sun, countless as the stars he has learned to trust. "Go, walk through the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it to you." And so Abraham rises, his heart full of quiet joy, ready to explore this inheritance that stretches beyond every horizon he can see. Abraham stood at the edge of his territory, his weathered hands shading his eyes as he gazed across the expanse that God had promised him. The morning sun cast long shadows across the rolling hills, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wild herbs and distant cedar groves. This was the land he would survey, the inheritance spoken of in whispered promises under starlit skies. His sandaled feet found their rhythm on the ancient paths that wound between limestone outcroppings and valleys dotted with olive trees. Each step seemed to echo with the weight of divine covenant, each turn revealing new vistas of the promised territory. The land stretched before him like an unrolled scroll, written in the language of stone and soil, stream and meadow. In the distance, shepherds moved their flocks along well-worn trails, their calls drifting softly across the landscape. Abraham paused to watch them, remembering his own journeys with livestock, the patient movement from pasture to pasture, the careful attention to water sources and grazing grounds. This land would sustain generations, its rivers running clear and its hillsides rich with vegetation. The boundaries seemed to extend beyond the horizon, encompassing fertile valleys where grain would wave in future harvests, and highlands where vineyards would eventually dot the slopes. Abraham's survey was not merely of geography but of possibility, of the generations that would call this place home. As afternoon shadows began to lengthen, he found himself on a ridge overlooking a particularly beautiful valley. The sight filled him with quiet satisfaction, a deep recognition that this was indeed the land of promise. Here, beneath the vast canopy of sky, the future would unfold according to divine design. The survey continued as evening approached, each landmark becoming familiar, each path offering new perspectives on the territory that would belong to his descendants. The land itself seemed to welcome his presence, offering its secrets to the one who would be its steward. The morning sun filters through the acacia trees as Abraham and Lot sit together in the shade of Abraham's tent. The conversation they must have has been approaching like distant thunder, and now the moment has arrived with the gentle inevitability of dawn. Abraham's voice carries the weight of wisdom earned through years of wandering and waiting. He speaks slowly, each word chosen with care, like a shepherd selecting the safest path through rocky terrain. There is no anger in his tone, no bitterness about the quarrels between their herdsmen. Instead, there is something deeper, more profound, a recognition that some decisions, though difficult, can lead to greater peace. Lot listens with the respect due to his elder, his hands folded in his lap. The dust motes dance in the slanted light between them, and somewhere in the distance, sheep bells chime softly as the flocks move to new grazing grounds. This is not a moment of conflict, but of gentle resolution. Two kinsmen finding a way forward that honors both their relationship and their practical needs. Abraham gestures toward the horizon with a slow, encompassing movement of his weathered hand. The land stretches endlessly in all directions, rolling hills and green valleys, streams that catch the light like scattered silver, pastures that seem to breathe with the movement of grass in the breeze. There is abundance here, he explains, enough for both their households to prosper. The patriarch's proposal is simple and generous, spoken with the calm authority of one who trusts in promises greater than immediate circumstances. Let there be no strife between us, he says, for we are brothers. Is not the whole land before us? If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right, or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left. The words hang gently in the warm air, an offer of peace that transforms potential conflict into opportunity, division into blessing. The morning sun spreads its golden light across the landscape as Abraham and Lot prepare for their final parting. The servants move quietly through the camp, gathering belongings and preparing the flocks for their separate journeys. There's a sense of peaceful resolution in the air as both men have accepted this necessary division of their paths. Abraham watches as Lot's household organizes their departure toward the Jordan plain. The cattle low softly in the distance, and the sheep bleat gently as they're gathered into traveling groups. The sounds of preparation are muted and calm, like the whisper of wind through desert grass. Lot approaches his uncle one last time before the journey begins. The two men embrace warmly, their friendship unchanged despite the practical need for separation. Abraham's weathered hands rest on Lot's shoulders as he offers a final blessing for the road ahead. Their words are few but meaningful, carrying the weight of shared memories and mutual respect. The sun climbs higher as Lot's caravan begins to move eastward. The dust rises gently beneath the feet of animals and servants, creating a soft haze that catches the morning light. Abraham stands watching until the procession becomes small figures on the horizon, then turns back to his own camp with quiet dignity. The land stretches peacefully in all directions, now spacious enough for both households to thrive. Abraham's servants continue their work with renewed purpose, knowing their master has chosen wisdom over wealth, relationship over riches. The gentle rhythm of camp life resumes, punctuated by the soft bleating of sheep and the distant call of birds overhead. In this moment of transition, There's a sense of rightness about the decision. The land will provide for both men, and their friendship will endure across the miles that now separate them. Abraham gazes toward the hills where his future lies, ready for whatever journeys await in God's unfolding plan. Abraham stands alone now in the quiet hills near Hebron, the great oaks of Mamre casting long shadows in the evening light. The separation from Lot, though necessary, has left a profound stillness in his heart. He walks slowly among his tents, listening to the gentle lowing of cattle and the soft conversations of his servants preparing for the night. The land stretches before him in all directions, rolling hills dotted with olive trees and patches of wild grass swaying in the breeze. This is the inheritance promised to him, yet it feels vast and empty without family nearby. He thinks of Lot, perhaps settling into his new home near the Jordan, and wonders if his nephew feels this same quiet loneliness. As twilight deepens, Abraham climbs a small rise overlooking his camp. The cooking fires begin to twinkle below like earthbound stars. His shepherds move peacefully among the flocks, their voices carrying softly on the evening air. There is comfort in these familiar sounds, in the rhythm of daily life that continues despite the changes. He remembers the words spoken to him about this land, about descendants as numerous as dust. Tonight, under the emerging stars, that promise seems both distant and strangely present. The very ground beneath his feet holds mystery and potential, as if it knows secrets he has yet to discover. The night air carries the scent of wild herbs and the distant sound of a shepherd's flute. Abraham breathes deeply, feeling the weight of solitude transform slowly into something else. A deepening trust, a quiet confidence that his path, though sometimes lonely, leads toward something greater than he can yet imagine. The morning light filters through Abraham's tent as he rises with a sense of profound peace settling over his heart. The Lord's voice still echoes gently in his memory, those sacred words about lifting up his eyes and looking in every direction. There is something deeply comforting about divine promises, the way they seem to wrap around a person's soul like a warm covering on a cool evening. Abraham steps outside, his sandaled feet touching the earth that has been promised to his descendants. The ground feels different somehow, more significant beneath his steps. He remembers the Lord's instruction to walk through the land, to traverse its length and breadth, and the thought fills him with quiet wonder rather than urgency. The landscape stretches endlessly before him, rolling hills dotted with olive trees and patches of green pasture. Somewhere in the distance, he can imagine the great sea that borders this promised territory, its waters reflecting the morning sun. To the east, the Jordan Valley winds its way through the terrain, fertile and inviting. His flocks graze peacefully nearby, their gentle movements creating a soft rustling sound that blends with the whisper of wind through the grass. The servants move about their morning tasks with quiet efficiency, their voices creating a low, comforting murmur that speaks of home and belonging. Abraham closes his eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. The promise of countless descendants feels as real as the breeze that stirs his robes. He can almost see them in his mind's eye, generations upon generations walking these same paths, tending flocks in these same fields, finding shelter under these same wide skies. When he opens his eyes again, the land seems to shimmer with possibility. Each hill and valley holds the promise of future stories, of children and grandchildren who will call this place home. The thought brings a gentle smile to his weathered face, a contentment that runs deeper than the wells his servants have dug. The morning light filters gently through Abraham's tent as he kneels in quiet contemplation. The dust has settled from yesterday's victory, and now comes the deeper work of the heart. God's voice comes to him like a gentle breeze, carrying promises that have sustained him through every trial. Do not be afraid, Abraham. I am your shield, your very great reward. These words wash over him like cool water after a long journey. The recent battle, the rescue of Lot, the encounter with Melchizedek, all of it has led to this moment of divine reassurance. Abraham feels the weight of God's protection settling around him like a warm cloak. But Abraham's heart carries questions, gentle concerns that he brings before his Creator with the trust of a child. Lord God, what can you give me since I remain childless? The words are not complaints, but the honest longings of a faithful heart. The response comes with tender certainty. Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them. So shall your offspring be. Under the vast canopy of night, Abraham gazes upward at the countless points of light scattered across the darkness. Each star seems to whisper of future generations, of children who will carry the promise forward through time. The vastness doesn't overwhelm him now, but fills him with wonder. Together they look up at this celestial promise, feeling the quiet stirring of hope renewed. The stars seem closer tonight, their light softer and more welcoming. In this peaceful moment, Abraham's faith takes deeper root. He believes the Lord, and it is credited to him as righteousness. This simple trust, this gentle acceptance of God's word, becomes the foundation upon which all future blessings will rest. The covenant between Creator and servant settles into Abraham's heart like seeds finding rich soil. Tomorrow will bring new journeys, but tonight there is only this sacred stillness, this holy pause where earth touches heaven and promises take root in the quiet places of the soul. The night sky stretched endlessly above Abraham as he stood outside his tent, the weight of recent events settling into his bones like dust after a long journey. The stars seemed closer tonight, each one a silent witness to the covenant that had shaped his path. The gentle breeze carried the familiar scents of the camp wood smoke, livestock, the earthy smell of well-worn leather. Sarah emerged quietly from their tent, her footsteps soft against the ground. She moved with the graceful economy of someone who had learned to find peace in uncertainty, her presence a steady anchor in Abraham's world of divine promises and earthly challenges. Together they stood in comfortable silence, two souls bound by more than marriage, bound by a shared faith in something greater than themselves. Abraham had watched them go with mixed feelings, knowing that their rescue was complete, but sensing that their story was far from over. The wealth that Chedorlaomer had accumulated still lay distributed among Abraham's men, though Abraham himself had taken nothing beyond what was needed to sustain his household. The priest-king Melchizedek's blessing still seemed to hover in the air around them, his words about the Most High God echoing in Abraham's memory. There had been something timeless about that encounter, as if the boundaries between heaven and earth had grown thin for those precious moments. In the distance, the gentle lowing of cattle provided a drowsy soundtrack to the night. The herdsmen had settled the flocks for evening, their familiar routines bringing order to the end of another day. Abraham's servants moved quietly through the camp, banking fires and securing provisions, their loyalty proven once again through the recent trials. The stars above seemed to pulse with quiet promises, each point of light a reminder of divine faithfulness. Abraham sits quietly beside the well at Beersheba, the gentle lapping of water against stone creating a peaceful rhythm in the evening air. The day's heat has given way to cooler breezes that carry the scent of wild herbs across the plain. His flocks graze contentedly in the distance, their soft bleating mixing with the whisper of wind through the scrub brush. The covenant with Abimelech weighs comfortably on his mind, not as a burden, but as a settled matter that brings order to his days. 7 ewe lambs have sealed their agreement. 7 witnesses to peaceful intentions between two peoples who choose understanding over conflict. The tamarisk tree he planted stands as a living reminder of God's faithfulness, its young branches already reaching toward the star-filled sky. Sarah moves quietly through their tent, her presence a gentle comfort as she tends to the evening tasks. The soft rustle of fabric and the quiet clink of pottery create a domestic symphony that speaks of home, even here in this temporary dwelling. Their servants go about their duties with the easy familiarity of people who have found their place in the world, secure in the knowledge that their master's God watches over them all. The fire burns low, casting dancing shadows that seem to tell stories of their own. Abraham remembers the flames that once consumed Sodom and Gomorrah, but tonight's fire speaks only of warmth and sustenance, of gathered community and shared meals. The transformation feels complete, as if the very nature of fire has been redeemed in this quiet moment. Somewhere in the distance, a nightbird calls softly to its mate, and the sound carries across the plain like a gentle blessing. The stars emerge one by one, each a reminder of the promise that his descendants will be as numerous as the lights above. Tonight, that promise feels as close as his own heartbeat, as certain as the ground beneath his feet. The morning sun cast long shadows across the camp as Abraham's household prepared for another journey. The servants moved quietly, rolling up tents and securing provisions with the practiced efficiency of those who had traveled many miles together. There was a sense of purpose in the air, a feeling that they were moving towards something significant. Abraham had received clear direction about where to go next. The land of Canaan stretched before them with its rolling hills and ancient paths, and somewhere in that landscape lay the place called Hebron. It was near the great trees of Mamre, a location that would become deeply meaningful in the months and years ahead. The camels stood patiently as bundles were secured to their backs. These faithful animals had carried Abraham's family across vast distances, through desert winds and mountain passes, never failing in their steady service. Their soft breathing and gentle movements added to the peaceful rhythm of departure. Sarah walked beside Abraham as they set out, her steps sure and confident. The morning air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of wild herbs and distant cedar trees. Birds called from the scattered oak trees that dotted the landscape, their songs blending into a natural symphony that seemed to bless the journey. Wildflowers grew in quiet clusters along the way, their colours soft and subdued in the morning light. The sound of the caravan's movement was unhurried and peaceful, the soft padding of feet and hooves creating a soothing rhythm. As they travelled, Abraham reflected on the promises that had guided him this far. Each step forward was an act of faith. Each day, a gentle unfolding of purposes larger than himself. The landscape around them seemed to whisper of ancient stories and future hopes, all woven together in the quiet tapestry of their journey. The sun climbed higher, warming the earth and bringing out the rich scents of the land. Somewhere ahead, beneath the spreading branches of Mamre's trees, a new chapter of their story was waiting to begin. Abraham's feet carry him along the ancient pathways, following the familiar routes that wind through the hill country of Canaan. The afternoon sun filters through scattered clouds, casting gentle shadows across the rocky terrain. His flocks move peacefully ahead, their soft bleating creating a rhythmic melody that mingles with the whisper of wind through wild grasses. The landscape begins to change as they approach the plain of Mamre. Rolling hills give way to more level ground, and in the distance, Abraham can see the distinctive silhouettes of great oak trees rising from the earth like ancient sentinels. These are the oaks of Mamre, trees that have stood for countless generations, their massive trunks weathered by time and seasons. As they draw closer, the true magnificence of these oaks becomes apparent. Their branches spread wide, creating pools of cool shade beneath their leafy canopy. The largest of the trees stands with such majesty that it seems to command the entire plain. Its trunk is so broad that several men could not encircle it with their arms, and its roots run deep into the rich soil of this place. Abraham feels a deep sense of peace settling over him as he approaches these ancient guardians. There is something about this grove that speaks to his soul, a quietness that invites rest and reflection. The oaks have witnessed the passing of many seasons, many travelers, many moments of joy and sorrow. Now they offer their shade to Abraham and his household. The servants begin to set up camp beneath the spreading branches, their movements unhurried and purposeful. Waterskins are unpacked, tents are positioned in the dappled shade, and the animals are led to graze in the sweet grass that grows around the base of the great trees. The sound of their activities blends softly with the gentle rustling of leaves overhead. Abraham walks slowly around the largest oak, his hand occasionally touching its rough bark. The tree seems to pulse with life, its deep roots drawing sustenance from hidden springs far below. Birds nest in its high branches, their gentle chirping adding to the peaceful atmosphere of this sacred grove. It is a place of both beauty and strategic importance, where paths converge and travelers often pause to rest. But more than that, it is a place that seems touched by the divine, where the boundary between earth and heaven feels thin and permeable. The shade of the great oak trees provided welcome relief from the midday sun as Abraham rested near his tent at Mamre. The flocks grazed peacefully in the distance, their gentle bleating carried on the warm breeze that stirred the leaves above. Sarah had prepared fresh bread that morning, and the aroma still lingered pleasantly around their dwelling place. Abraham's servants moved quietly about their daily tasks, drawing water from the well and tending to the animals with practiced efficiency. The rhythm of their work created a soothing backdrop to the peaceful afternoon. Birds nested in the branches overhead, their soft chirping adding to the tranquil atmosphere of this place Abraham had chosen to call home. The patriarch found comfort in these quiet moments when he could reflect on the promises God had made to him. The land stretched out before him in all directions, rolling hills covered with grass and dotted with olive trees. This was the inheritance that had been promised to his descendants, though he could not yet see how it would all unfold. A gentle breeze stirred the tent flaps, and Abraham adjusted his position to remain comfortable in the shade. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ground, creating patterns that shifted slowly as the hours passed. Somewhere in the distance, a shepherd played a simple melody on his flute, the notes floating peacefully through the still air. The well nearby provided a constant, subtle sound of water trickling over stone. Abraham's household had settled into the comfortable rhythms of this place, each person knowing their role in maintaining the harmony of their community. The tents were arranged carefully to provide both privacy and protection, creating a sense of home in this land of promise. As the afternoon wore on, Abraham felt the deep satisfaction that comes from knowing one is exactly where they belong. The God who had called him from his father's house had brought him to this good land, and here he would wait patiently for whatever the future might hold. The peace of Mamre settled over him like a warm blanket, encouraging rest and reflection. The morning sun cast long shadows across the plains of Mamre as Abraham sat beneath the great oak trees. The gentle warmth touched his weathered hands as he rested in the doorway of his tent, watching the peaceful movement of his flocks in the distance. The air carried the soft sounds of daily life, the low murmur of voices, the distant bleating of sheep, and the whisper of wind through leaves. As Abraham gazed across the familiar landscape, 3 figures appeared on the horizon. They moved with quiet purpose across the dusty ground, their forms becoming clearer as they approached. Without hesitation, Abraham hurried toward them, his steps quick but reverent. As he drew near, he bowed low to the ground, his voice filled with humble welcome. The visitors stood calmly before him, their presence bringing an unusual sense of peace to the already tranquil afternoon. Abraham's words flowed with generous hospitality, offering water to wash their feet and a place to rest beneath the shade of the trees. His heart stirred with the ancient custom of caring for strangers, yet something deeper moved within him, a recognition he could not quite name. The 3 visitors accepted his invitation with gentle nods, settling themselves beneath the spreading branches. Abraham hurried to Sarah's tent, his voice eager as he asked her to prepare fresh bread from their finest flour. He then selected a tender calf from his herd, instructing his servants to prepare it with care. As the meal was prepared, Abraham stood nearby, attending to his guests with quiet devotion. The afternoon stretched peacefully around them, filled with the soft sounds of preparation and the gentle conversation that would soon unfold. The visitors waited patiently, their presence transforming this simple meal into something far more significant than Abraham yet understood. The morning light filters through the tent walls as Abraham sits quietly, his hands folded in contemplation. The events of the previous night seem almost dreamlike now, yet the weight of God's promises still rests gently upon his heart. Sarah moves softly nearby, preparing the morning meal, and the familiar sounds of the camp awakening drift through the desert air. In this peaceful moment, Abraham reflects on the words that came to him in the darkness. The promise of descendants as numerous as the stars feels both impossible and inevitable, like watching the sun rise each day knowing it will set again. His faith, tested and strengthened through the rescue of Lot and the encounter with Melchizedek, has become something deeper than mere belief. Dust motes dance in the golden light that streams through the tent opening, creating patterns that shift and change like the very promises God has spoken. Abraham watches these tiny particles floating freely, remembering how the Lord told him his offspring would be like the dust of the earth. Sarah approaches with warm bread and fresh milk, her presence bringing comfort to the morning stillness. They share their simple meal in companionable silence, each lost in thoughts of the journey that has brought them to this moment. The bread tastes sweeter somehow, blessed by the knowledge that they are part of something greater than themselves. Outside, the desert stretches endlessly toward the horizon, its vastness no longer intimidating but welcoming. Every grain of sand seems to whisper of the promises yet to be fulfilled. Every gentle breeze carries the scent of hope. The nomadic life that once felt uncertain now feels purposeful, each day a step forward in God's unfolding plan. As the sun climbs higher, painting the landscape in soft golds and ambers, Abraham feels a deep contentment settling over him like a warm blanket. The future remains unwritten, but his trust in the Lord's faithfulness has become as steady as the morning dawn. The winds of change blow gently across the plains where Abraham's tents are pitched, carrying with them whispers of divine promise that seemed impossible to mortal ears. Sarah, now 90 years old, moves slowly through her tent, her weathered hands arranging the simple household items that have traveled with them through countless journeys. The fabric walls flutter softly in the desert breeze, creating gentle shadows that dance across the woven carpets beneath her feet. Abraham sits in the doorway of their dwelling, his own century of life etched deeply into his patient face. The heat of the day begins to soften as evening approaches, and the familiar sounds of their household settling into rest drift through the air. Servants tend to the flocks in the distance, their quiet voices blending with the soft bleating of sheep and the gentle lowing of cattle. In the quietness of their tent, Sarah reflects on the words spoken by the mysterious visitors who appeared at their door. The promise of a child seemed to mock the reality of her aged body, and her laughter had bubbled up unbidden, not from joy, but from the impossibility of it all. How could new life spring from such ancient soil? How could her worn hands cradle an infant after all these years of empty longing? Yet something in the stranger's voice had carried weight beyond human understanding. The certainty in those words seemed to echo with the same authority that had first called Abraham from his father's house so many years ago. Sarah's fingers trace the edge of her head covering as she considers the mysteries of divine timing, how the Creator's plans unfold in seasons far longer than human comprehension. The evening light grows softer, painting everything in gentle amber hues. Abraham's breathing becomes steady and deep, and Sarah finds herself settling into the familiar rhythm of rest that has sustained them through decades of wandering and waiting. The evening air carries a gentle warmth as we find ourselves once again in Abraham's tent, where the flickering light of oil lamps creates soft shadows on the woven walls. Abraham sits quietly, his weathered hands folded, his heart heavy with questions that have lingered like morning mist. The Lord had promised him descendants as numerous as the stars, yet Sarah remains childless. Years have passed since that first promise, and Abraham's faith, though strong, sometimes wavers like a candle in the softest breeze. He gazes upward through the tent opening, where countless stars pierce the velvet darkness. Sarah moves quietly nearby, her own thoughts hidden behind patient eyes. She has carried this burden of childlessness with grace, yet Abraham sees how her shoulders sometimes bear the weight of unspoken sorrow. The tent feels both intimate and vast, holding their shared hope and quiet disappointment. In the distance, the gentle sounds of the camp settling for the night drift through the air. Sheep bleat softly, and the night watch calls out their peaceful reports. These familiar sounds have become the rhythm of their nomadic life, a life that continues despite the questions that linger in their hearts. Abraham rises slowly and steps outside, where the cool night air touches his face. The stars above seem brighter tonight, each one a reminder of God's promise. He breathes deeply, letting the desert silence wash over him. Somewhere in this vastness, God's timing unfolds with perfect precision, though Abraham cannot yet see the full picture. The promise remains, patient and sure as the stars themselves, waiting for its appointed time to bloom into reality. Tonight, in this peaceful moment, Abraham rests in that promise, trusting in what he cannot yet see, but knows to be true. Abraham stands before the Lord as the sun begins its descent toward the western horizon, casting long shadows across the ancient landscape. The moment has arrived for one of the most profound conversations between heaven and earth, a dialogue that will echo through the ages as an example of righteous intercession. The Lord has revealed his intentions regarding Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham's heart is heavy with concern for his nephew Lot, who dwells within those city walls. But more than personal concern drives Abraham forward. It is a deep sense of justice and mercy that compels him to approach the Almighty. With reverence and humility, Abraham draws near and speaks softly. Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? The evening air is still as Abraham continues his gentle plea, his voice carrying the weight of genuine care for both justice and mercy. Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? The Lord's response comes with patience and grace, agreeing that if 50 righteous persons are found in Sodom, the entire place will be spared for their sake. But Abraham's heart knows the reality of Sodom's spiritual condition, and with increasing boldness tempered by humility, he continues his intercession. Step by step, Abraham negotiates with divine mercy, from 50 to 45, then to 40, 30, 20, and finally to 10 righteous souls. Each request is met with the same gracious response, revealing both God's justice and his abundant mercy. The conversation unfolds like a gentle stream, each word carefully chosen, each plea offered with the deepest respect for the one who holds all things in his hands. The two angels who had visited Abraham now made their way towards Sodom as the evening settled over the Jordan Valley. Their forms appeared as ordinary travelers, dusty from the road, their steps measured and purposeful as they approached the city gates. The limestone walls of Sodom rose before them, weathered by countless seasons, their surfaces catching the last golden light of day. Lot sat in the gateway, a place of honor where the elders of the city would gather to conduct business and settle disputes. The cool stone beneath him provided relief from the day's heat, and he watched the steady flow of people moving in and out of the city. When he saw the two strangers approaching, something within him stirred with recognition, though he could not quite place what it was. Rising quickly, Lot hurried toward them, his movements urgent yet respectful. He bowed low, his voice taking on the tone of one who understood the sacred duty of hospitality. The customs of his uncle Abraham had not entirely left him, even here in this place, so different from the quiet hills where they had once dwelt together. The angels paused at his greeting, their eyes taking in the man before them and the city that lay beyond. They spoke of continuing to the town square, of spending the night beneath the open sky, but Lot pressed them earnestly. His insistence carried the weight of genuine concern, for he knew too well what dangers the darkness might bring in these streets. Finally, they turned and followed him toward his house, their sandaled feet moving silently over the worn stones. The narrow streets wound between dwellings built close together, their walls reflecting the voices and movements of families settling into evening routines. Cooking fires began to flicker in courtyards, and the scent of bread and roasted grain drifted on the gentle breeze. At Lot's dwelling, preparations began immediately. Water was brought for washing, and the household stirred to accommodate these unexpected guests. The familiar rhythms of hospitality unfolded as they had for generations, a sacred dance of service and welcome that connected this moment to countless others across the vast expanse of time. The night air carries urgency as Abraham's camp stirs with purpose. Word has reached them through desert messengers that 4 eastern kings have swept through the land like a terrible storm, taking captives and plunder. Among those captured is Lot, Abraham's nephew, along with his family and possessions from Sodom. Abraham feels the weight of family bonds pulling at his heart. Despite their earlier parting, despite the distance that had grown between them, Lot remains his brother's son. The old patriarch moves through his camp with quiet determination, his weathered hands selecting trusted men, his voice calm but resolute as he explains what must be done. From his tent emerged 318 trained men, each one born in Abraham's household, each one loyal beyond question. These are not hired soldiers, but men who have grown up under Abraham's care, who understand the sacred duty of protecting family. They move with practiced silence, checking their weapons, preparing provisions that will sustain them through the pursuit ahead. Their sandaled feet find rhythm against the earth, following the trail left by the retreating kings. The desert wind whispers around them, carrying scents of distant fires and the faint sounds of a vast caravan somewhere ahead in the night. Abraham's heart beats steady as a drum, not with the fever of war, but with the quiet strength of a man fulfilling his deepest obligations. Behind him, his men move like shadows across the landscape, their breathing even, their purpose clear. They are outnumbered many times over, yet they press forward with the confidence of those who serve a higher calling. The moon watches their progress across the ancient land, casting long shadows that stretch and shift as the rescue party moves deeper into the night, following the path that will lead them to Lot and the confrontation that awaits at Dan. The two angels rose early with the first pale light of dawn. Their gentle but firm voices reached Lot where he rested. "Hurry," they said softly, "take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished." But Lot hesitated, his feet heavy with uncertainty. The city had been his home for so long. The angels, showing the Lord's mercy, took hold of his hand, his wife's hand, and the hands of his 2 daughters. They led them safely out of the city, their footsteps quiet on the dusty streets. Once they were outside, one of the angels spoke with gentle urgency. "Flee for your lives. Don't look back, and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains or you will be swept away." Lot's voice trembled as he replied, "No, my lords, please. Your servant has found favor in your eyes, and you have shown great kindness to me in sparing my life. But I can't flee to the mountains. This disaster will overtake me, and I'll die. Look, here is a town near enough to run to, and it is small. Let me flee to it." "It is very small, isn't it? Then my life will be spared." The angel's response came with understanding. "Very well, I will grant this request too. I will not overthrow the town you speak of. But flee there quickly, because I cannot do anything until you reach it." So Lot hurried toward the small town, his family close beside him. The sun was rising over the land as they reached safety. Behind them, the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah, completely destroying those cities and everyone living in them. But Lot's wife looked back, and she became a pillar of salt, standing silent in the morning light. Behind them, the city of Sodom continued to burn in the early morning light, its smoke rising like incense into the pale sky. Lot's wife had been walking steadily beside her husband and daughters, her sandaled feet finding their rhythm on the dusty path that led toward the small city of Zoar. The angels had been clear in their instructions. Do not look back, do not stop, keep moving until you reach safety. But as they walked, something stirred within her heart. Perhaps it was the sound of familiar voices carried on the wind, or the scent of the olive trees that grew near her former home. The city behind them had been her world for so many years. Her friends lived there, her neighbors, the marketplace where she had bought bread and pottery, the well where the women gathered to draw water and share the day's news. Her daughters walked ahead with their father, their faces set toward their new beginning. But she found herself slowing, her steps becoming heavier with each passing moment. The memories called to her like old songs. The laughter of children playing in the streets, the evening gatherings on rooftops, the familiar comfort of the life she had built. Unable to resist any longer, she turned her head to look back at the city. In that instant, as her eyes fell upon the destruction, she was transformed into a pillar of salt, standing motionless on the path like a monument to the past she could not release. Lot and his daughters continued walking, unaware at first that she was no longer with them. When they finally realized she had stopped, they found her there. A crystalline figure facing toward what had once been their home, her form catching the morning light like scattered diamonds. They understood then what had happened, and though their hearts were heavy with grief, they knew they must continue on to Zoar, carrying her memory forward into whatever new life awaited them. The morning sun rises gently over the Jordan plain, casting long shadows across the battlefield where yesterday's chaos has given way to profound stillness. The kings who terrorized this region have fled or fallen, their armies scattered like leaves before an autumn wind. Abraham stands quietly among his men, surveying the landscape that stretches endlessly toward distant mountains. The rescued captives gather their few remaining possessions with careful, deliberate movements. Children cling to their mothers' robes while fathers speak in hushed, grateful tones. These people who faced an uncertain fate now breathe freely under the vast, open sky. Their eyes hold the wonder of those who have witnessed something beyond ordinary human experience. Abraham's servants move methodically through the abandoned enemy camp, collecting provisions and caring for the wounded. The 318 men who followed their master into battle now tend to practical matters with the same quiet efficiency they showed in combat. There is no boasting, no celebration, only the steady work of those who understand they have been part of something greater than themselves. Everything taken by the invading kings has been restored, yet Abraham regards these material things with the detached gaze of one whose thoughts dwell on higher matters. Lot approaches his uncle slowly, his face bearing the weight of recent events. The nephew who chose the well-watered plains of Jordan has learned hard lessons about the true cost of dwelling among the wicked. His gratitude mingles with something deeper, a recognition that divine protection extends beyond human understanding. The camp stirs with gentle activity as preparations begin for the journey home. Pack animals are loaded with careful attention, and the rescued people organize themselves into traveling groups. The horror of captivity fades gradually, replaced by the simple joy of freedom and the prospect of returning to familiar places. Abraham's gaze drifts toward the horizon where Hebron waits, where the great oaks of Mamre stand in ancient silence. Soon he will return to his tents and his altar, to the quiet rhythms of pastoral life. But something has changed in these days of conflict and rescue. The promise that guides his steps feels more real now, more tangible than the very ground beneath his feet. Abraham moves with purpose through the familiar landscape, his heart heavy with concern for his nephew Lot. The news of the great battle and Lot's capture has reached him, and now he must act swiftly. Yet even in his urgency, there is a calmness about him, a quiet confidence that comes from knowing he walks in the Lord's favor. The morning sun filters through scattered clouds as Abraham gathers his household. 318 men, trained and ready, respond to his call. These are not just servants but trusted companions who have journeyed with him through countless seasons. Their faces show determination mixed with loyalty, ready to follow their master into unknown dangers. The preparation is methodical and unhurried. Weapons are checked, provisions gathered, and routes discussed in hushed tones. Abraham's voice carries a gentle authority as he explains their mission. They will pursue the coalition of kings who have taken Lot captive, traveling north toward the distant city of Dan. The journey begins in the soft light of early morning. The caravan moves steadily but quietly across the rolling hills, following paths that wind through olive groves and past shepherds tending their flocks. The rhythm of their movement is almost meditative, sandaled feet finding purchase on the ancient stones, the gentle sound of leather and bronze equipment creating a soft percussion against the morning stillness. As they travel, Abraham's thoughts turn to prayer. He speaks quietly to the Lord, seeking guidance and protection for the journey ahead. The familiar weight of responsibility settles on his shoulders, but it is a burden he has learned to carry with grace. He knows that this rescue mission is not just about family loyalty, but about the promises God has made. The landscape gradually changes as they move northward. The hills become more pronounced, the valleys deeper. Springs of clear water provide refreshment for both men and animals. The pace remains steady, unhurried but persistent, like a gentle river that eventually carves through the hardest stone. In the distance, dust clouds mark the trail of the retreating armies. Abraham's trained eye reads the signs left in the earth, the broken branches, the scattered belongings that tell the story of hasty retreat. His men follow these silent markers with the patience of experienced trackers, knowing that persistence will eventually lead them to their goal. The sun climbs higher, warming the earth and bringing with it the familiar scents of wild herbs and flowering bushes. Despite the serious nature of their mission, there is something peaceful about this journey across the ancient land, following paths that have been worn smooth by countless generations of travelers. The battle lines had been drawn across the valley, and now the morning sun cast long shadows over the assembled armies. Abraham had gathered his 318 trained men, each one sworn to his household, each one ready to follow wherever their master might lead them in this quiet hour before dawn. The air was still and cool, carrying the faint scent of wild herbs and the distant sound of water flowing through the valley below. Abraham moved among his men with the steady confidence of one who had walked with God, his voice low and reassuring as he spoke to each group, reminding them that they fought not for conquest or glory, but to bring home their kinsman, Lot, and the other captives who had been taken from Sodom. Dan lay ahead of them, a place where the 4 kings had made their camp, believing themselves safe in their victory. But Abraham had learned the paths of this land well during his years of wandering, and he knew the secret ways that wound through the hills, the hidden valleys where a smaller force might move unseen. The servants of Abraham's household had become more than workers tending flocks and herds. Through the years of journeying together, sharing the same wells and the same fires, they had become a family bound by loyalty and trust. Now, they would march together through the darkness, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth, their hearts steady with the knowledge that their cause was just. As the last stars began to fade in the lightening sky, Abraham raised his hand and his men fell silent. The time had come to begin their careful advance toward the enemy camp, where Lot waited unknowing for rescue and where the morning would bring a battle that would echo through the generations. The rescue of Lot was about to begin, carried forward on the wings of faith and quiet courage. Abraham's victory spreads like gentle ripples across the ancient landscape. The rescued kings gather around him in the valley of Shavesh, their voices soft with gratitude and amazement. Here stands a man who asked for nothing yet accomplished everything, who sought no glory yet earned the deepest respect. The evening air carries the scent of cooling earth and distant campfires. Abraham's servants tend to the animals they've recovered, their movements unhurried and peaceful. The rescued people find comfort in simple things: clean water, warm bread, the safety of Abraham's presence. Children who had been frightened now play quietly among the tents, their laughter like small silver bells in the gathering dusk. Melchizedek, the priest king of Salem, approaches with bread and wine. His robes whisper against the ground as he walks, and his face holds the calm dignity of one who serves the Most High God. He blesses Abraham under the star-filled sky, his words floating upward like incense. The blessing feels ancient and eternal, connecting this moment to something far greater than any earthly victory. The king of Sodom offers Abraham great riches, but Abraham's response comes gently, firmly. He will take nothing for himself, wanting no one to say they made him wealthy. His integrity shines like a steady flame, unmarred by the temptations that might sway other men. He asks only that his allies receive their portion, keeping nothing but what his young men have eaten. As the night deepens, Abraham's camp settles into peaceful rest. The rescued people sleep safely, the animals graze contentedly, and the stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance. Tomorrow will bring new journeys, but tonight there is only the quiet satisfaction of righteousness fulfilled and promises kept. The dust settles gently around Abraham's feet as he returns from the valley of Shavesh. The evening air carries the scent of wild herbs and the distant sound of trickling water from hidden springs. His men walk quietly behind him, their sandals whispering against the worn path that leads toward the hills of Canaan. As they approach a grove of ancient oak trees, a figure emerges from the shadows. This is Melchizedek, king of Salem, and his presence brings a sense of profound peace to the twilight hour. He moves with the quiet dignity of one who has walked these lands for many seasons, his robes flowing like gentle streams in the cooling breeze. Melchizedek carries bread and wine, simple gifts that speak of hospitality and blessing. The bread is warm, freshly baked from grain that has grown in the fertile valleys nearby. The wine gleams dark and rich in clay vessels, pressed from grapes that have ripened under countless sunrises and sunsets. Abraham pauses, recognizing something sacred in this moment. The two men stand beneath the spreading branches of the oak trees, where filtered moonlight creates patterns of silver and shadow on the ground. There is no hurry here, no pressing urgency, only the quiet meeting of two souls in the gentle embrace of evening. The king of Salem speaks words of blessing, his voice soft as the night wind moving through the leaves overhead. He acknowledges the Most High God, the one who possesses heaven and earth, the one who has delivered Abraham's enemies into his hands. These words fall like drops of honey, sweet and nourishing to the spirit. Abraham receives the bread and wine with reverence, understanding that this simple meal carries meaning beyond its humble appearance. The bread breaks easily between his fingers, releasing the warm scent of grain and earth. The wine tastes of sunlight and rain, of seasons past and seasons yet to come. In this quiet grove, surrounded by the gentle sounds of evening settling over the land, Abraham gives a tenth of all he has recovered to Melchizedek. This act of giving flows as naturally as water from a spring, a recognition of something greater than the victories of war or the accumulation of wealth. The two men part as quietly as they met, Melchizedek disappearing into the shadows of the trees like a whisper of wind. The evening air carries the scent of bread baking in clay ovens as Melchizedek, king of Salem, prepares to meet the returning warriors. His servants move quietly through the palace chambers, gathering vessels of wine and loaves still warm from the fire. There is something sacred in this moment, something that transcends the mere greeting of victorious soldiers. Abraham's caravan appears on the horizon, dust settling around the feet of weary men and rescued captives. The patriarch sits straight upon his camel, his weathered face calm despite the battles fought. Behind him, the people of Sodom walk free once more, their chains broken, their hope restored. Melchizedek emerges from the city gates, his robes flowing like water in the gentle breeze. He is both priest and king, a figure of quiet authority who serves the Most High God. In his hands he carries the elements of blessing, bread representing sustenance and life, wine symbolizing joy and covenant. The two men meet in the valley, surrounded by the stillness of approaching night. No words are needed at first. Melchizedek breaks the bread with careful hands, the sound soft as a whisper. He pours the wine into simple cups, the liquid catching the last rays of sunlight like liquid amber. As they share this meal together, there is recognition between them. Two servants of the same God, meeting in a moment that will echo through generations. The bread is simple yet nourishing, the wine pure and sweet. Around them, the rescued people rest, grateful for their deliverance. Melchizedek speaks a blessing over Abraham, his voice carrying the weight of divine favor. The words flow like a gentle stream, invoking the protection and provision of the Most High. Abraham receives this blessing with humble gratitude, understanding that his victory came not from his own strength, but from the hand of God. In the growing twilight, this sacred encounter continues, bread and wine shared between two faithful men, a moment of peace after the storm of battle. The dust settles along the roadway as Abraham's caravan moves slowly through the valley. The rescued captives walk alongside the camels and donkeys, their faces still bearing traces of relief and wonder. Behind them, the defeated armies of the Eastern kings have retreated far into the distance, leaving only scattered remnants of their hasty departure. Abraham rides at the head of his group, his weathered hands steady on the reins. The victory feels almost dreamlike now in the gentle morning light. 318 of his trained servants had followed him into battle, and by God's providence, They had prevailed against forces far greater than their own. As they approached the valley of Shaveh, two figures emerged from different directions to meet them. The first is the king of Sodom, his royal robes dusty from travel. His eyes scan the approaching group, taking in the sight of his rescued subjects and the recovered goods that trail behind Abraham's caravan. But it is the second figure that draws the deeper attention. Melchizedek, king of Salem, approaches with a bearing that speaks of ancient wisdom and quiet authority. His servants carry bread and wine, simple offerings that seem to carry profound significance in this moment. The priest of the Most High God raises his hands in blessing as Abraham dismounts. The words flow like honey in the warm air, speaking of blessing from the God who made heaven and earth, praising the Almighty who delivered Abraham's enemies into his hands. Abraham listens to these words of blessing with a humble heart. When Melchizedek concludes his prayer, Abraham carefully counts out 1/10 of all the spoils of war. The tithe passes from his hands to those of the priest, a recognition of God's sovereignty over all that has transpired. The exchange happens quietly, witnessed by the rescued captives and Abraham's faithful servants. There is something deeply peaceful about this moment, this acknowledgement of divine provision in the aftermath of conflict. The king of Sodom approaches Abraham with measured steps, his robes rustling softly in the warm evening breeze. The rescued people of his city gather at a respectful distance, their faces filled with gratitude and wonder at this shepherd who became their deliverer. The king's voice is earnest, carrying the weight of genuine appreciation. He speaks of Abraham's remarkable victory, how this peaceful herdsman pursued trained warriors across great distances to bring back the captives. The rescued citizens nod in quiet agreement, their eyes reflecting the firelight as they watch this extraordinary scene unfold. Abraham listens with patient attention, his weathered hands resting calmly at his sides. The king's offer is generous. Keep all the goods recovered from the enemy, he suggests, and return only the people to their homes. It would be a substantial reward, enough to enrich Abraham's household beyond measure. The recovered treasures glisten softly in the flickering light. Gold ornaments catch the glow. Fine fabrics shimmer with delicate threads, and vessels of precious metals reflect the dancing flames. All of this wealth lies within Abraham's reach, rightfully his by the customs of victory. Yet Abraham's response comes with quiet dignity. He raises his hand gently, his voice steady and clear in the desert air. He speaks of an oath made to the Most High God, a promise that binds his conscience more firmly than any claim to spoil or treasure. The king watches with growing respect as Abraham explains his position. No thread, no sandal strap, nothing that belongs to Sodom will remain in his possession. Let no one say that the king of Sodom made Abraham rich, for his provision comes from another source entirely. Here stands a man who values his word above gold, his relationship with the divine above earthly gain. In the gentle desert night, Abraham's character shines more brightly than any treasure. Abraham stood quietly before the king of Sodom, his weathered hands resting calmly at his sides. The desert wind moved gently through the valley, carrying with it the scent of dust and distant fires that had long since died away. The king's entourage waited in respectful silence, their robes rustling softly in the evening breeze. The king's voice was measured and gracious as he spoke to the great patriarch. He offered Abraham all the goods that had been recovered from the defeated armies, chests of silver, golden ornaments, fine fabrics, and countless other treasures that glinted softly in the fading light. It was a generous offer, one that would have made Abraham wealthy beyond measure. But Abraham's eyes remained steady and unmoved by the display of riches before him. He had made a solemn vow to the Lord God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and his word was as unchanging as the stars that began to appear in the darkening sky above them. With gentle dignity, Abraham lifted his hand and spoke his refusal. He would not take so much as a thread or a sandal strap from all that belonged to the king of Sodom. His voice carried the quiet strength of one who had walked with God, who had heard the divine promises whispered in the desert silence. The patriarch explained that he would accept nothing that might allow the king to claim he had made Abraham rich. The Lord alone was Abraham's portion, his shield and exceeding great reward. The treasures of earthly kingdoms held no appeal for one who had received the covenant of the Almighty. Only what the young men had eaten during their journey and the portions belonging to his allies who had fought beside him would Abraham allow to be taken. Anna, Eshcol, and Mamre had earned their share through their courage and loyalty. As the king received this answer, there was something almost peaceful in the way Abraham stood firm in his conviction, his refusal spoken without pride or harshness, but with the quiet certainty of one whose treasure lay elsewhere. Abraham stands quietly beneath the ancient oak trees of Mamre, their branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. The weight of recent events settles around him like a soft blanket. The rescue of Lot, the encounter with Melchizedek, the meeting with the king of Sodom. All these memories flow through his mind like a peaceful stream. The patriarch raises his eyes toward the darkening sky, where the first stars begin to appear like tiny jewels scattered across velvet. In this moment of stillness, he feels the familiar stirring in his heart that signals the Lord's presence drawing near. The air grows calm, almost reverent, as if the very earth beneath his feet recognizes something sacred about to unfold. Abraham kneels slowly, his weathered hands resting gently on the ground. The grass beneath him feels cool and welcoming. He has built altars before, has called upon the name of the Lord in various places throughout his journey, but tonight feels different. Tonight carries the weight of covenant, of promises spoken and received. The gentle breeze carries the scent of wildflowers and the distant sound of his flock settling for the night. Sarah moves quietly about their tent, preparing for evening, her presence a comfort even in the gathering dusk. The familiar sounds of camp life, the soft lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through tent ropes, create a symphony of peace. As Abraham lifts his voice in prayer, his words flow like honey, sweet and measured. He speaks of gratitude for protection in battle, for the safe return of Lot, for the mysterious blessing of Melchizedek. Each word carries the rhythm of deep trust, the cadence of a heart that has learned to rest in divine promises. The oak leaves rustle overhead, creating a natural canopy for this moment of communion. Abraham's voice grows softer, more intimate, as he pours out his heart to the one who called him from Ur, who promised to make of him a great nation. The stars above seem to lean closer, as if heaven itself is listening to this quiet conversation between the eternal and the temporal. In the growing darkness, Abraham's faith shines like a beacon, steady and unwavering. His words become a lullaby of trust, a gentle affirmation of the covenant that binds him to his God. The night embraces him with its peaceful silence, and his prayers rise like incense into the star-filled sky. The dust settles slowly around Abraham's feet as he stands at the edge of the battlefield, watching the last of Chedorlaomer's forces disappear into the distant hills. The rescued captives gather their belongings while the evening breeze carries the scent of cooling earth across the valley. Abraham's heart feels both heavy and light. Heavy with the weight of what he has witnessed, light with the knowledge that his nephew Lot is safe. The servants move quietly among the recovered goods, organizing supplies for the journey ahead. Everything speaks of return, of going home. The king of Sodom approaches with measured steps, his robes rustling softly in the gentle wind. His face bears gratitude mixed with something deeper, a recognition of the extraordinary thing that has happened here. He speaks of Abraham keeping the goods, taking what is rightfully his after such a victory. But Abraham's response comes quietly, thoughtfully. He has sworn to the Lord God Most High that he will take nothing, not even a thread or sandal strap, lest anyone say they made Abraham rich. His words drift across the evening air like a prayer, humble and certain. The redistribution happens peacefully. Goods return to their rightful owners. The rescued find comfort in familiar possessions. Everything moves with the rhythm of restoration, of things finding their proper place in the world. As preparations continue for departure, Abraham's thoughts turn toward home, toward the oaks of Mamre near Hebron, where his tent awaits. The familiar paths, the known landscapes, the quiet places where he can once again tend his flocks and speak with his God in the stillness of morning and evening. The stars begin to emerge overhead, the same stars that have watched over his journey from the very beginning. They seem to whisper of promises kept, of faithfulness rewarded, of the quiet strength that comes from walking in righteousness. Soon the caravan will move, carrying everyone back to the places where they belong, back to the gentle hills, the grazing lands, the peaceful rhythms of daily life. Abraham looks once more across the valley, then turns his face toward home, toward Hebron, toward rest. The morning sun filters through the tent walls as Abraham rises, feeling the weight of recent events settling into a quieter understanding. The rescue of Lot and the people of Sodom has concluded, the kings have departed, and now there is time for reflection upon what has transpired. Abraham walks slowly among the tents, observing his men as they tend to their daily tasks. Their movements carry the satisfaction of those who have acted justly, who have answered the call when it came. The flocks graze peacefully in the distance, their gentle bleating, a comforting sound that speaks of normalcy returning. The shepherds move among them with practiced ease, their staffs catching the morning light as they guide their charges to the sweetest grass. Sarah emerges from their tent, her face serene as she takes in the peaceful scene. There is understanding in her eyes, a recognition that this moment of calm is precious after the intensity of recent days. She moves with quiet grace, attending to the simple tasks that bring order to their dwelling. The bread bakes slowly in the outdoor ovens, filling the air with its warm, wholesome scent. The servants work with gentle efficiency, their voices low and pleasant as they share the morning's tasks. Children play softly nearby, their laughter like music drifting on the breeze. Abraham finds himself drawn to a slight rise overlooking their encampment. From here, he can see the entirety of their peaceful settlement spread below. The tents arranged in their familiar pattern, the cooking fires sending thin wisps of smoke skyward, the animals contentedly grazing in their designated areas. The land stretches endlessly in all directions, vast and welcoming under the gentle morning sun. This is the inheritance promised, the place where his descendants will flourish. In this quiet moment, surrounded by the evidence of divine provision, Abraham feels the deep satisfaction of one who has walked faithfully in the path set before him. The years continue to flow like gentle streams through the land of Canaan, carrying with them the quiet certainty of God's promises. Abraham's hair has grown whiter with each passing season, yet his steps remain steady as he tends to his flocks and maintains the altars he has built across the land. The covenant sealed with fire and smoke has become the foundation upon which his entire existence rests. In the peaceful hours of evening, when the desert wind carries the scent of acacia blossoms, Abraham often reflects on the journey that brought him here. From the bustling city of Ur to the rolling hills of Canaan, each step has been guided by the voice that first called him to leave everything familiar behind. The separation from Lot, though painful at the time, has allowed both men to flourish in their chosen territories. The servants speak in hushed tones of their master's unwavering faith, how he continues to believe in promises that seem impossible to human understanding. They watch him gaze toward the stars each night, remembering the divine pledge that his descendants would be as numerous as those distant lights. Sarah moves through their tent with the quiet dignity of one who has learned to trust in timing beyond her own understanding. The promise of a son still echoes in her heart, though the natural seasons of life seem to have passed her by. Yet she has witnessed too many impossible things to doubt that God's word will somehow find its fulfillment. The land itself seems to respond to Abraham's presence, as if recognizing the one chosen to inherit it. The wells he has dug continue to flow with clear water, providing life for both his household and the travelers who pass through. His reputation as a man of peace and righteousness has spread throughout the region, earning him respect among kings and nomads alike. As the gentle darkness settles over Canaan, Abraham's legacy continues to take root in ways both seen and unseen, growing quietly toward a destiny that will reshape the world. The quiet hours following Abraham's return from Damascus Road offered space for reflection. The night air carried the gentle sounds of the camp settling into peaceful rest. Servants moved softly between the tents, banking cooking fires and securing the flocks for the night. The familiar rhythm of sheep breathing and the soft rustle of goats shifting in their sleep created a lullaby of contentment. Abraham walked slowly through his restored camp, observing how quickly life had returned to its normal patterns. The rescued captives had been reunited with their families, tears of joy replaced by quiet conversations and shared meals. Children who had been torn from their parents now slept peacefully in familiar arms, their small faces relaxed in the security of home. The patriarch's thoughts turned to the lessons woven through recent events. The separation from Lot, though painful, had demonstrated God's faithfulness in providing for both households. The rescue mission had revealed strength Abraham hadn't known he possessed, drawn from a source beyond his own abilities. The encounter with Melchizedek had offered wisdom that would nourish his understanding for years to come. Sarah appeared beside him, her presence as comforting as it had been through all their journeys together. She slipped her hand into his, and they continued their evening walk in companionable silence. The stars above seemed particularly bright tonight, each one a reminder of God's promise about their future descendants. In the distance, they could see the glow of cooking fires from other camps scattered across the valley. Each represented families and communities, all part of the larger tapestry of human life that God was weaving through history. Abraham felt a deep sense of gratitude for his place in this grand design, however small it might seem. The gentle breeze carried the scent of wild herbs and the distant sound of water flowing over stones. These simple pleasures felt precious after the intensity of recent challenges. Abraham understood that faith wasn't built only in moments of crisis, but also in quiet hours like these, when the heart could rest in God's goodness. As they approached their tent, Sarah squeezed his hand gently. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, but tonight offered the gift of peace. The lessons of faith were learned not only in action, but in the quiet trust that allowed for peaceful sleep under the star-filled sky. The evening settles over the land like a gentle blanket, bringing with it the kind of peace that comes after days of travel and decision-making. Abraham sits quietly outside his tent, watching the last traces of sunlight fade from the western sky. The air is still and cool, carrying with it the soft sounds of animals settling for the night. His flocks have found their resting places among the gentle slopes near Hebron. The sheep huddle together in their familiar groups, their wool catching the faint starlight that begins to emerge overhead. The goats, ever curious, have finally ceased their wandering and lie contentedly near the water sources that Abraham's servants have carefully prepared. Sarah emerges from the tent, her steps soft against the packed earth. She moves with the quiet grace of someone who has learned to find home wherever their journey leads them. The cooking fires have been banked for the night, sending up thin wisps of smoke that disappear into the darkening sky. In the distance, barely visible now, the lights of Sodom twinkle like earthbound stars. Abraham's thoughts drift briefly to his nephew Lot, settled now in that prosperous valley. He offers a quiet prayer for his kinsman's well-being, trusting that the God who has guided their steps will continue to watch over them both, even as their paths have diverged. The servants move about their evening tasks with practiced efficiency, their voices low and respectful in the gathering darkness. Water jars are filled and set aside for morning use. The tent ropes are checked and adjusted. Everything speaks of a household that has learned the rhythms of nomadic life, finding security not in walls of stone, but in the presence of the Almighty. A gentle breeze stirs the acacia trees, their leaves whispering softly in the night air. Abraham pulls his cloak closer around his shoulders and gazes upward at the stars beginning to appear in greater numbers across the vast expanse of sky. Each point of light seems to speak of promises yet to be fulfilled, of a future as numerous and bright as the heavenly host above. The night settled over Abraham's camp like a gentle blanket, and as the last embers of the cooking fires dimmed to soft glows, the patriarch found himself drawn into the realm of dreams. Sleep came easily after the long day of travel and the peaceful resolution with Lot, and Abraham's breathing grew deep and rhythmic beneath the star-filled sky. In his dream, Abraham walked through landscapes that seemed both familiar and wonderfully strange. The hills rolled endlessly before him, covered in grass so green it seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Rivers flowed clear and sweet, their waters catching the golden rays of a sun that never seemed to set too harshly or rise too quickly. He saw flocks of sheep and goats grazing in meadows that stretched beyond the horizon, their wool white as fresh snow, their movements peaceful and unhurried. The shepherds who tended them moved with the same gentle rhythm, their voices carrying soft songs that seemed to blend with the whisper of wind through olive groves. Cities appeared in the distance, their walls gleaming like polished stone, but these were cities of harmony rather than strife. Markets bustled with quiet activity, children played in shaded courtyards, and the sound of laughter drifted on warm breezes. Abraham walked through these scenes like a benevolent observer, his heart filled with a deep contentment he had rarely known while awake. The dream shifted, and he found himself standing on a high hill, looking out over a vast valley. Below him, countless tents dotted the landscape like stars fallen to earth. Each tent glowed with its own gentle light, and from each came the sounds of families at peace, mothers singing lullabies, fathers telling stories, children drifting off to sleep with smiles on their faces. Abraham understood, in the way that dreams allow understanding without words, that these were the generations yet to come, the promise taking shape in the realm of sleep and vision. The knowledge filled him with a warmth that seemed to radiate from his very core, spreading through his dreaming form like honey through warm bread. The evening air carries a gentle whisper across the plains where Abraham's camp rests in quiet contemplation. The wind moves through the olive trees with a soft rustling that seems to speak of distant places and ancient promises. Each breath of air brings with it the scent of wild herbs and the earthy fragrance of the land that stretches endlessly toward the horizon. Abraham sits beneath the familiar oak tree, his weathered hands resting peacefully in his lap as he listens to the symphony of the evening. The wind speaks in hushed tones, carrying stories from the hills and valleys beyond. It whispers of the flocks grazing in peaceful meadows, of streams that flow quietly through hidden valleys, and of the countless stars that will soon emerge in the darkening sky. The servants move about the camp with quiet efficiency, their footsteps soft against the earth as they tend to the evening tasks. The camels rest in contentment, their gentle breathing adding to the peaceful rhythm of the night. Cooking fires burn low, their warm light casting dancing shadows that sway gently with each breath of wind. Sarah emerges from their tent, her movements graceful and unhurried as she joins Abraham beneath the tree. Together they sit in comfortable silence, listening to the wind's gentle conversation with the leaves above. In the distance, the hills stand silhouetted against the twilight sky, their rounded forms creating a gentle horizon that seems to cradle the earth. The wind carries across these ancient places, touching every blade of grass, every stone, every creature that calls this land home. It speaks of continuity and peace, of the quiet moments that make up the fabric of life in this timeless place. The warmth of the desert evening settles around the camp as Abraham sits quietly beneath the ancient oaks of Mamre. The dust from the recent journey has settled, and the men who rode with him to rescue Lot have returned to their homes, carrying with them stories of unexpected victory and divine providence. Abraham's servants move about with familiar routines, tending to the animals and preparing the evening meal. The sound of their gentle conversations mingles with the soft lowing of cattle and the distant bleating of sheep. These are the sounds of peace, of a life that has found its rhythm once again after the disruption of war. In the distance, toward the Jordan Valley, the darkness seems deeper tonight. The cities of the plain continue their existence, but something has shifted in the air between the mountains and the valley. Abraham can sense it in the way the evening breeze carries different scents, in the quality of silence that falls when the wind stills. Lot has chosen his path, and Abraham has chosen his. The land stretches before them both, vast and full of promise, yet each man will walk it according to his own understanding. The separation that began with their flocks and herds has become something deeper, a choosing of different ways of life, different hopes for the future. The stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky, each point of light a reminder of the promise spoken under just such a canopy of night. Abraham lifts his eyes to them, feeling the familiar sense of wonder at their countless number. Somewhere in that vast display lies the shape of his descendants, the outline of promises yet to be fulfilled. Sarah approaches quietly, her footsteps soft on the well-worn ground of their dwelling place. She settles beside him, and together they watch the night deepen around the camp. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities to trust in the voice that called them from their distant homeland. But tonight, under the sheltering branches of Mamre, there is peace. The story of Abraham and Lot, of choices made and paths taken, finds its rest in the quiet confidence that the God who calls also provides, who separates also blesses, who leads into uncertainty, also promises to remain faithful.